this.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I was sitting there and I was watching it and it didn't seem any different to me. And then it's like we see him later and I was like, was that just good suspension of disbelief thinking that it was 14 years ago, or did they make him look younger? So then when I watched it again, I'm like, oh, and then articles or whatever, videos and stuff popped up and I was like, oh, right, okay. So, I mean, for a TV show, this was better than some movies I've seen.
Very much so. What about the nickname JL?
Yeah, that's from the comic book. She calls him JL in the comic, which is pretty funny to me because literally no one has ever called Picard JL. Not even Jean. Like, no one's ever called him. It's either Jean-Luc or Captain Picard.
Right.
And she called him JL, which is so funny to me.
I can't tell what I think about it. It's interesting. I like the choice, but it's so jarring to hear it.
Yeah.
It is jarring. It's true.
I thought it was weird, and then, because we sort of talked about it last week about how she calls him that, and I was looking in my notes from past episodes and I was like, oh I always wrote JL. So all the TNG episodes we did, I wrote JL for short for Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah, I would often write JLP in my notes for him too. So yeah, I mean, I think it's adorable, but it's definitely unexpected for sure.
Right. It's like in the one trailer when Riker calls him by his first name instead of Captain Picard. It's like, what? Oh yeah, they're just friends now. Then we have our intro with our credits and the music. And Nicola, what did you think of that? Do you like the music and stuff or the credits?
I'm really a fan of how all the credit scenes really match the shows that they are. And I feel like these credits are really cool and they match the story that Picard's telling. They're different, and I like them.
Cool. So, after the intro, we go back to Raffi's porch, and when it says where they are, it actually says Vasquez Rocks, present day, and I'm like, I love it. They didn't even have to say that's where they were because, they've shot lots of Star Trek things there. But I thought it was a cute little Easter egg that they put that they're like, oh no, that's really where they're at. Picard is sitting on the porch at her table. She's trimming a plant and he's telling her about, there was a synth girl. Now she's dead. She's got a sister. I got to find her. I need a pilot and a ship and all this stuff. And I got to find Bruce Maddox. She cannot believe the gall of this man and says, you've got some nerve. And even though... I know. Even though this show is rated TV 14 or whatever it says. I wish they had told us that sooner. I'm going to, when you listen to this, I have been bleeped myself out because I think it's hilarious to do that. And then she takes some of the clippings that she had gotten and she stuffs it in like a vape pen. And I wrote, for the kids.
That to me is another thing that was jarring.
Yeah, it was
right?
The vaping, I know it comes later, but the cigar.
Right?
It feels very not Star Trek. But, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if they play any kind of, if they're just there to be there, or if they play some sort of character device. It'll be interesting.
It's this whole scene with Jean-Luc and Raffi is a very interesting scene. It's a very non-Trek scene in a lot of ways because, number one, there's the cursing where she says, sorry, Brooke, and then you'll have to bleep me there. And then there's the vape pen, which they talk about later on that it makes her paranoid. So I'm like, so it's basically like weed? Is that what we're, and then the fact that she talks about how her life has been so difficult after she got kicked out of Starfleet, and that somehow it almost referring to as if Picard has all this money and is living in this fancy house, and she's living in this hovel, which doesn't quite jive with the Federation and not really have using money. So there's a lot in this scene where I'm just like, this is very un-Trek-like of Star Trek, which it's not a complaint on my part. It's really just more of an observation to see how the franchise is changing as we go on.
I read a few comments on Reddit that kind of talked about like why it can make sense for Star Trek.
Okay.
And part of it was like, well, this is Picard's like family chateau. Like, it's not just, this is something that's been in the family. And so like, it makes sense for him to retire there. Well, sure. She gets fired after all the synthetics have been banned. Who's going to make all the stuff for people? Like, what is the fact that we've now banned synthetics? What does that mean for, like, building houses now? Like, the universe itself has really changed if we're banning synthetics.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's because, I mean, when you think back to, like, let's say, other Star Trek series, did they really have, like, synthetic beings or synthetic people building stuff? They kind of almost implied that, like, you could just, get a piece of land or build a house wherever you wanted to, as long as nobody else was already living there. And, like, money was not an option. Like, you didn't have to pay somebody to do it because the Federation doesn't use money. I think that to me was kind of, I didn't quite know how to reconcile that, or didn't quite know, like, almost implying like she's scrounging to survive, but it's like, but I don't understand how in a society where there's no money, how are you disadvantaged? I'm just trying to wrap my head around that.
Well, I wonder, because most of the time when we encounter people in Star Trek, it's, aliens or like on a Federation ship, or, something that is actually like Starfleet. Or at least what I've watched. And so I feel like maybe it's easier for everybody to sort of be equal and just do their job or whatever and have the food they want and whatever. But I guess she probably lost some status because she was fired from her job as the first officer to an admiral. Like, she had a pretty high up job, and there's probably people who just don't see her the same way, who don't, like, even though, oh, hey, I'll trade you this, or you could take this, or whatever, it's like, maybe they give her worse stuff. I don't know. Maybe it's a little more lawless for just everyday people.
Yeah, but also,
yeah, that's a great point there, Brooke, about, like, kind of, like, losing a status, because you've lost, like, your position at Starfleet.
But she also didn't choose this either. Like, with Jean-Luc, like, he was the one that said, like, you either do this or I'm out. And, like, that was the decision he made. He made the decision, although he was surprised by it, that, like, he's now out of Starfleet. But because he's out, she suffered because of his actions and had no part of, like, voluntarily leaving. So who knows how it affected her mental health.
Yeah, that's also a really great point. She didn't choose this outcome. She's just almost like a victim of it, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She tells him that it hurts her feelings because he hasn't really talked to her in this 14 years. I mean, besides the fact that he didn't, he said, oh yeah, I'll resign if you don't do this, and then they took his resignation, and he didn't say, hey, well, Raffi doesn't have anything to do with this, so don't do anything to her. Besides that, that's what I was going to say, is, he hasn't even called her to, see how she's doing or send her space mail or anything. Space mail. I'm sorry. My joke was stupid, but I laughed at it.
I think space mail is a real thing. I mean, there's email, there's snail mail, and now there's space mail.
Yeah.
I think it's the only logical progression.
Thank you, Spock.
Well, how else are you going to get your space pineapple but through the space mail?
Oh, right. I guess if it goes from one place on Earth to another, it's not space mail. But yeah, the people on Mars to get their space pineapples had some sort of space mail for sure. Space delivery service. Of course, he shows up and he wants something from her, and that's the first time he's talked to her, so she's mad, and she storms off, and she takes her wine with her. So then we go to the next scene, and we see the Borg cube, and it's one of those shots where it starts far back, and it zooms in and goes in between things, and kind of like those shots that they would do on, like, House, where they'd go into somebody's body, and you see their blood cells, but instead here you're seeing, like, people working, and ships, and doors, and things. And we see the procedure from last episode where Soji is there, and she talks to the nameless guy, and we find out that there's somebody is like watching it, on a screen, and it's Hugh. And we're like, hey, how you doing, Hugh? And he has 2 different colored eyes now, because one of them is supposed to be a fake eye because he had his eye implant. You can see the little scars and stuff on his face, and so that's kind of exciting. He's watching this video of her, and he sees her talk to this ex-Borg in his own language, and he seems intrigued by it. So he goes off to find her, and she says something about that she learned from him that, it's soothing to hear something in your mother language, mother tongue, I think is what she says, even if it's just a few words. And, I think that's fair. And Hugh's talking to her, and he's telling her she's different because for ex-Borg, like, people are either sort of afraid of them and want to, put them away and warehouse them, is what he said. Some people think of them as property, and he's noticed that the Romulans kind of think of them as both. And he's calling them ex-Bs, so like a little X and then a B for ex-Borg. So that's kind of fun. So, turns out, the reason why he came to find her is he decided that he's going to let her have an interview with Rhonda. She's an ex-Borg. She's Romulan. She's also an expert in ancient Romulan mythology. So Soji believes that, there is some, like, healing capabilities for people who have a shared narrative. So, like, a shared mythical narrative is her whole thing. So she wants to find out about all of these Romulan mythology from this woman, and so then they can share their pain through stories. I guess.
Yeah, this was actually a pretty interesting scene here of the disordered. And
yes, I forgot to type in what they were called.
Well, I thought it was really interesting how these were, and they were all Romulan, and I'm sure that we'll talk about that in a bit. But I did think it was interesting how she basically felt like there could be some kind of healing if she could, kind of get them into a group therapy situation, which is not a terrible idea. Group therapy has helped, and therapy in general has helped people with many issues. Yeah, I really did like this scene. I thought it was great to see Hugh again, and how he really took an interest in what Soji was doing and how she was different than everybody else who was working in this on this cube.
Has it explained yet, like, how Hugh got there, how he started working with the Romulans in this capacity?
To my knowledge, no, they haven't talked about how he got there.
Okay.
Yeah, the last time we saw Hugh was in Descent in Next Generation. From there to here, I don't know how he got there.
Yeah, and we'll find out later, but to here means he's the executive director of this thing, which is, in my notes I wrote, he seemed to have taken the leader speech that Picard gave him in Descent Part 2 to heart, because he's really, like, going in there and he's being in charge. But we'll get to that. Unless anybody wants to talk about it now, because that's fine. Anyway, so Hugh wants to give her 30 minutes, and they go off so that she can do this.